Whether you find yourself out in public or in the privacy of your own home, chances are that when you are in the presence of others, many of them have their eyes focused on their smartphone screens. Our lives are so focused on our phones that we are seeing the breakdown of relationships, attention spans, and critical thinking. What would happen if we locked our phones away for an entire week? College professor and author Donna Freitas recently conducted an experiment where she had her students untether for 7 days. Join us for a lively and eye-opening conversation with Donna about what she and her students learned about our dependence on smartphones and what happens when we shut down on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, it's another episode of Youth Culture Matters, and I'm Walt Mueller here at CPYU. Jason Sochanek joining us as almost always usual.
Yep.
From the upper left in Spokane, Washington. And we are excited today to have a conversation about smartphones and technology and what happens when we actually shut down, which doesn't happen nearly enough. I mean, Jason, do you have practices in your own life where you have built in these quiet times? You know, I call it a Sabbath from technology.
Oh, that's great. I don't call it Sabbath. I just call it rules.
Okay.
But we as a family try to, as soon as we come through the door, just leave. Right now, it's only my wife and I that have devices, so we just leave them at the kitchen table, and they sit there for most of the evening and until the morning. I use my phone as an alarm, so I'll take my phone to bed with me. And but that's about it. But I don't check my phone during the night or anything like that. It's just essentially when I get home, I try to not use it anymore if I need to.
Boy, we may have to talk about that taking the phone to bed thing, because some of the things I'm hearing about blue light and charging and all that. We'll ask about that today for sure.
Yeah.
At what age? I'm just curious because you're 20 years younger than me, so you're 43 now. You 43?
Yeah.
What age? What age did you get a phone? How old were you when you got your first phone?
It was given to me by the ad agency that I was working at. So I think I was 24 or 25. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you are not a digital native. You, like me, are a digital immigrant. We're more alike than you would be, than you would care to admit normally. So we at least have that in common. And Chris, when did you get your phone? First phone? When is that?
I bought what would be called a car phone when I was 18.
Was it one of those big, like a
it was fairly,
attaché case?
It was pretty big, yes.
Yeah. I'll bet you were pretty proud walking around with that thing.
No, there was no walking around with
Okay. You were probably the envy of all your friends, though. Well, we're going to talk about this because we've got this generation now of digital natives who, it's like they're born with these things in their hands. I know when I travel, I was on the West Coast this last weekend, and it just seems everywhere I go, I can't put a number on it, but maybe half of the people I see are walking, sitting, maybe more than half, walking, sitting, facing screens. So we decided we need to have another conversation with our friend, Dr. Donna Freitas. And Donna, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Donna, we're going to talk about something that Donna did with a group of college students that made the news, and this is why we got a hold of her, because I just thought this was brilliant. It was fun to track with. We're going to hear about it. But before we do that, we did have Donna on before. We talked about her book, The Happiness Effect, and she's written extensively on a variety of youth culture issues and matters. And Donna, just for folks who may not be familiar with you, catch us up on the trajectory of your studies and the writing you've done.
Oh, wow. Well, I've done a lot of writing, so I'll just talk about my nonfiction research. I think it's about 15 years ago now, I started looking into how college students think about sex when they're on campus. And I was looking at campus culture and whether or not a campus had a religious affiliation or was a private secular school or a public institution, and how that might affect the culture around sex on campus. And that research really just sparked a lot of conversations and ended up bringing me to a lot of different colleges and universities over the years to speak about that research and to sit and listen to students about where they were on these issues. And it was those conversations that led me to launch a different study about social media and smartphones and the college experience, which is, how I ended up here on your show today. But, really I'm interested in maybe the conversations we need to be having with college students that we often don't, and the different things that cause them to struggle while they're in college, and also to search, I think. And one of those things happens to be sex, and another of those things happens to be social media and smartphones. And so really my books have revolved around these issues, anything from my very first book on my research, which was called Sex and the Soul, Juggling Sexuality, Spirituality, Romance, and Religion on America's College Campuses, to The Happiness Effect, which you mentioned. And also I'm a frequent speaker about the topic of sexual violence in Title IX on campus. And I have a book about that as well called Consent on Campus, a manifesto, definitely a manifesto. So that's sort of a summary of my nonfiction research in the last few years.
And we're going to, as we tell people all the time, if you go to our homepage, cpyu.org, and find the player for this particular episode of the podcast, you can scroll down and we'll have links to all of Donna's books. And I think we'll throw some links up as well, Chris, to some of the YouTube videos, because those are engaging as well as you listen to Donna. You watch Donna converse with college students. You said, before we jump into what happened at Adelphi here a couple of months ago, you made an interesting comment about asking the question, why aren't we having these conversations, about sex, sexuality, about digital technology? Why aren't we having these conversations with college students? Offer some reasons for that, because some people are really timid to step into these conversations. And have you encountered that, or why are we so timid about this?
I think with regard to conversations about smartphones and social media, I think maybe we're starting to have them now, though I'm still not sure. I think people are waking up to the fact that we really need to talk about this. Our world has completely changed, especially since the last election and all the conversations about, Russia hacking our election, all those kinds of things, and how much social media is influencing how we think, for better or worse. But I think one of the reasons why we don't have the conversations is because things like sex, first of all, scare people. Especially if you're talking about it in religious circles. A lot of people joke that sex is like the third rail of religion. We're afraid to talk about it, especially with unmarried people. But I think some of it has to do with biases that we have on college campuses about what you talk about in the classroom and what you don't talk about. And, we tend to think of the personal and the subjective as not rigorous, not worthy of intellectual reflection. And I think the same goes for social media. Social media, we think of it as social. It has to do with relationships and those messy, elusive things that are hard to quantify. And I think those things that are hard to quantify are often not things that we bring up on the campus or in the classroom. And of course, they're some of the most difficult, challenging topics that we could possibly be talking about. And so from where I sit, I think they absolutely belong to be in the classroom. They're really tough topics that I wish we gave more credibility. And I wish that too, because I know that the students who sit in our classrooms at those colleges and universities really need us to be talking about these things. Like, they're really longing to have these conversations that are so relevant to their lives. So, but I think some of it just has to do with the biases that come with being at a university about what deserves to be talked about in the classroom and what doesn't.
Yeah. So talking about these things can actually trigger a little bit. We'll use that language, trigger people. I think, too, about media theorists, and having read media theorists years ago, long before I was even aware of such a thing as digital technology. Everything was analog at that point, but you'd read McLuhan, the medium is the message, and you'd hear things like, first we shape our tools, then our tools shape us. This is what you're dealing with, the way that we've been shaped or perhaps misshaped, formed or perhaps deformed by our tools. So talk about what happened at Adelphi. Tell us about the class you were teaching and this, social experiment you engaged in.
Well, I was invited to teach a first-year seminar class at Adelphi, and those classes are by nature experimental, or they can be. They're for first-year students, and they're just kind of an opening to the college experience, and there's all kinds of different topics. So people pick all kinds of topics for these classes, and then the students sign up for whichever one they want to take. And so I just thought I had done my research for the happiness effect and done this big national study on social media and smartphones. And basically what I did was I designed a course around some of the central questions that came out of that research. And one of the big ones that I came away with thinking, okay, we need to ask this question. This is like one of the most important questions of our time. Was, what does it mean to have a healthy relationship with our devices? What does it mean to have a healthy relationship with social media? And, can we develop a healthy relationship? So those were questions that were clear from my research that were crucial to ask. And I thought, okay, I'm going to base a course in that question. And part of it would be involve students giving up their smartphones for a week. And, we would get ready for it. We would, prepare for it. But then everyone who took the class was going to have to do this. And one of the things I thought was interesting, because this was in the description of the course, that, by the way, be prepared to give up your phone. My class, out of all the first year seminar classes, I think there were 50. Mine was the first one to fill. And I was told that by the head of the program. And I thought, I thought mine might be the last one to fill. So I just thought right off the bat, isn't it interesting that that's the course that all these first year students would take?
Can I ask you, did they see the syllabus before they registered, or as they registered, did they know what they were getting into?
Well, the syllabus they couldn't see, but there was a description of the course that said, we were going to talk about our relationship to social media and smartphones. And, it said very clearly, it's a short description, but be prepared to give up your phone. And so I just thought it was interesting that so many people would take it. But then when we got to the class the first week and I handed out the syllabus, one of the first things I said was listen, the centerpiece of this course is when we're going to give up our smartphones in November, and we're literally going to lock them away in a safe. And, that's happening. It's happening, and I need you to take that in. And if this is not your thing, if you don't want to do that, you have to drop the class. So I think at first some of the students thought I was kidding. And so I said, again and again, I'm really not kidding. There's no getting out of this. If you do not want to do this, if you feel you cannot, you need to drop the course. And only 2 students dropped, and then 2 more added in. So my class was full.
Wow. What I'm curious about with regards to the giving up the phone for a week, you said November, so was there a lot of prep time? Did you have to do a lot of work to prepare students for the fact that they are giving up their devices and to work through how they're going to manage communication with family members, with teachers, with friends? Because it seems like there would be some prep time, but I don't know if that was a part of the course.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would never have done it in September. That would have, I think, traumatized everyone. I also prepared people on campus before I did this. I went and I talked to the administration, and I got all sorts of approval for doing this, because I didn't know if, normally I would not ask for approval from anyone else at the university about a project. Like I would just assign it. I'm faculty. Like, why do I need approval? But I did think, okay, I should probably give some deans the heads up that I'm doing this and just make sure that, they're on board with it in case I need someone to have my back, because I didn't know if parents would get angry, or I don't know if somebody would complain, and I wasn't sure what people would feel on campus that I was doing this, but I had just resounding approval from the administration, and they were actually the people. One of the deans helped me get in touch with the head of public safety, because I also didn't want to be responsible for everybody's phones in my office. I didn't want to just like stick them in my office drawer, and then what if my office got broken into? And so they helped me connect with public safety so that we could lock the phones away and it would all be okay. And so I really found support on campus for the project, which I thought was encouraging. But I mean, we did the locking up of the phones. It happened just about near Thanksgiving. It was basically like the week before Thanksgiving. And the reason why it was then was because the point of the course was to get my students thinking about that question about healthy relationship. What does it look like? And also to become critical thinkers about their smartphone, social media, their relationships to these things. And I do think one of the most important things that all of us can do today, but especially if we are working with kids, is teaching them to become critical thinkers about smartphones and social media. I think, in the cheesiest way, like, knowledge is power, like it really is. And if I learned anything from the research that I did with college students across the country, it was the students who were already doing thinking, critical thinking about their relationship with their devices and social media, were in a much more empowered place in relation to these things than people who weren't. And I think this is where it becomes incredibly problematic that maybe our schools and our universities are not helping us become critical thinkers about these things, or not even seeing these aspects of life, of everyone's life, as worthy of doing critical thinking about. And so I wanted my students to read. I wanted them to discuss like the research that's out there. So we did a lot of reading of all kinds of research. We watched a lot of TED Talks. We really spent time thinking about what is our relationship to these things. And also I had my students for a while tracking their usage. So we would come into class and we would look at, okay, how many hours did you average a day on your smartphone last week? How many times did you pick it up? Because, your phone tracks all these things. And we would sort of have like a contest in my class, like who used it the least and who used it the most. And then we would see who shifted from week to week. So there was that kind of prep too. There was a lot of reading and researching and thinking about their usage before they unplugged. And then there was also just a lot of prep. Like some of them had to tell their teachers, by the way, I can't check the Facebook group, or like I can only do it from my laptop, or, next week because I'm giving up my phone. And they had to prepare their parents. They had to get alarm clocks. They had to get directions, to make sure they knew how to drive to school if they lived off campus. So we spent a lot of time doing that logistical prep too.
This is good. I love this. We need to take a break, but I'm just going to say, Chris and I are chuckling right now, looking at each other when you mentioned the alarm clock. I hope Kenton's listening, because we had this conversation with Kenton, who used to work with us here, who he would rely on his phone, and if his phone died, he would just be lost in another world. Time had no meaning for him then, so it's funny. So Kenton, if you're listening, enjoy this conversation. Well, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and continue our conversation with Donna Freitas about what happens when we drop off the world of technology and smartphones for about a week. We'll be right back. In an effort to help the kids you know and love navigate the difficult landscape of the emerging digital frontier to the glory of God, we've launched a Digital Kids Initiative here at CPYU. Thanks to a generous grant from a company called DAS, you can access our Digital Kids Initiative and a growing number of free resources and downloads by visiting the website at digitalkidsinitiative.com. This is one more way that we're helping you lead your kids to live lives where their faith in God is integrated into the growing amount of time they're spending with social media and technology. Well, we're chatting with Donna Freitas about what happened at Adelphi University last fall in her class when she asked 22 students, I think it was, to go without their smartphones for a week. And she was saying she had prepped them for this and was asking them about some of their, the amount of time they were tracking, the amount of time they were using their phones. I pulled this up, the Common Sense census from last year, commonsensemedia.org. They had some data that came out on daily screen use by tweens and teens. This is the amount of daily screen use, not including time on screens for school or homework. Tweens, who are 8 to 12-year-olds, they looked at about 4 hours, 44 minutes on average a day. And then our teenagers, 13 to 18 years old, what they discovered was about 7 hours and 22 minutes a day. Donna, you said that your students were tracking. They would come into class and talk about, you had this competition, who used it the most, who used it the least. What were you finding in terms of average use or, who used it the most, who used it the least? Was any of that surprising?
Well, I think it was interesting for the students themselves just to start paying attention to their usage, because the first time we did it, some of the students were shocked. Like, I had students who were up close to 9 hours a day. And we were like, at first it was like there were a lot of students who were around like 4 hours a day, 4 or 5 hours. But then we had some who were like, oh my gosh, mine says 8 hours and 44 minutes. And, and another one was like, oh, mine's only 8:20, and they were taking that in. And then we were joking with I had a student who was down around like an hour and a half and then like around 2 hours. And so they were really proud of themselves. But it was really interesting to see how just actually looking at that really made the students more conscious. And so by the time, we checked the next week where their usage was, the students who had been over 8 hours came way down. And they were really proud of themselves because they just became more conscious of how much they were grabbing their phones. That was the other thing, was how many times they grabbed for their phone. I had students who were up there in the hundreds per day. And they were sort of like, whoa, why am I grabbing it? And so one of the things we were trying to do was just, become conscious. Like I had them practicing, asking themselves, sort of interrogating their urge to grab their phone before they did it. Like, why do I want to grab this? Like, do I need to? Like, what am I looking for? Like, do I need to have it within reach? Like, so we were just talking about different ways to become more conscious about our usage, and the fact that we talked so much in the class too about the fact that, it's no secret now, these phones and apps are designed to addict us. And, they're designed like with the same theories that they use to design slot machines and gambling machines in mind. And so I think even just having the students take that in, and that reality that these devices, these apps are designed to cause us to reach for them all the time, to even make us lose sleep. And even just looking at like the autoplay function and what's that about. And it's not just there out of your convenience. It's actually there to because they want to keep you on the devices. And so even just these little bits of information, I think, had a dramatic effect on their sense of their devices and their usage. And I think that's, one of the best things we can do. We can just become conscious about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
I want to ask you about this real quick, and then I think Jason has a question. But you were talking about, helping them, peel back the curtain, so to speak, on the way these devices are designed, the ways that they addict us. You drew the similarity to slot machines. Did you get pushback, where they're looking at you funny going, are you kidding me? And then also, did you have them read anything? Was there anything besides what you were telling them that they were reading, whether textbooks or you would assign or readings that they found to be especially helpful that might serve to convince them otherwise of what their assumptions are? I
think during the class, leading up to the experiment when we all unplugged, I think my students went through maybe all the stages of grief, in terms of just denial and then, acceptance eventually. But because I think some of them maybe thought I wasn't really going to do this, that we weren't that somehow I was going to call off the experiment when we gave up our phones. And then as it got closer, I just kept telling them, this is really happening. This is really happening. Just FYI, it's happening. And by the way, even if you're absent that day, we'll just have you start the experiment a little later, but you're still going to go a whole week. And so, I think they went through a lot of different feelings about the experiment. But we did all sorts of things. We watched TED Talks by Tristan Harris and Sherry Turkle, and we read a lot of Sherry Turkle. They actually read The Happiness Effect in the class. Another little book we read that was really fun and wonderful. There's a book called How to Break Up with Your Phone, which has all these exercises that you can do in it. And so we did a lot of those exercises. And so we just were, reading all kinds of articles. We read the New York Times does a ton of articles about Silicon Valley. We read, they did a series about the kids of Silicon Valley executives, Mark Zuckerberg's kids, and their how they monitor their relationship with their kids' phones, or the fact that their phones, their kids aren't allowed to have screens, and how they have opened up schools in California where there are no screens. And what does that mean that the people who are in charge of Facebook and Google don't want their kids looking at screens at all? And so we read a lot of articles about that. We read another article about, it's called Human Contact is a Luxury Good, and how human contact and just the human in general at this point is going to become a kind of luxury that's only there for the rich. And we're going to use screens to take care of our kids and old people and all kinds of things. It's really interesting once you get on the rabbit hole to sort of look at the research that's out there, and also what the people who are in control are doing with their own kids. And so I think all of these things really helped my own students just become more conscious about their relationship with their phones, but also to think about what do they want for themselves in terms of their phones. So, because we talked a lot, one of the things that students said in the study a lot was something to the effect of, I know I'm supposed to be a user of Facebook, or I'm supposed to be a user of social media on my smartphones, but I feel used by it, or I feel used by my smartphone. And they knew that wasn't right, but they also didn't know how to fix balance. And so we talked a lot about that in the class too. And I think my students became concerned also about, okay, what does it mean to be a user of these things as opposed to just feel so out of control in relation to them?
Can you talk about the week that you spent without the phones and how that affected students relationally? Because you're talking a lot about the impact that phones are having on relationships. So I'm just curious, during that week, how relationships might have changed. I'm also curious if there were insights or things that happened that you were surprised by, or the students were surprised by in that week, with regards to breaking down or feeling lost. I'm just curious how that week might have been impacted by the loss of their phone.
Well, I think maybe one of the biggest surprises for me, and maybe even for the students, was just the fact that I think by the time we got to the week of the experiment, my students were excited to do it. And I was happy to see that, because I really wondered, what was going to happen? Were all my students really going to do this? Or were they going to chicken out? Or were they going to find some sort of loophole to get out of this experiment? And nobody did. Everyone did it. Everybody showed up the day that we started, and they were just excited. I think they almost felt special, like, we're doing this thing no one else is doing. And, and I think they were just curious to see what it would be like to live without their smartphones. And so I think their attitudes were really positive. So even after all that trepidation and some resistance early in the semester, by the time we got there, they were really positive. And I think the other thing that was incredibly surprising was all the press that we got about this experiment. And I think just like we had 3 different media outlets show up to film us. And I'll just tell you, like, I didn't know, none of us knew that that was going to happen. Someone had told the communications department at Adelphi that we were doing this thing. And they contacted me like a couple days before my class, before we were starting this experiment. And they were like, oh, would it be okay if someone interviewed you about this? And I was like, sure. And I thought they meant like someone on campus. And the morning before my class, they were like, oh, someone might be in your class to talk to you today. And I was like, okay. And then when I got there, they were like, camera crews outside my class. And I was like, what? Well, oh my gosh, there's CBS. And so suddenly we had all this media there. And I, so that surprised us. But also I thought to myself, like, isn't it interesting that a bunch of college students unplugging for a week would make national news? Like, what does that mean for our society that like TV crews would show up to film us? And so I think the fact that they were there, for better or worse, that we had all these cameras suddenly in the room and they want to interview my students, I think it also made my students realize, like, oh, what we're doing is a big deal. And I think in some ways it got them more excited too, to have all these people excited about what they were doing. But I think maybe one of the things that also surprised me as it was going on was how proud of my students, like how proud of themselves they were. So like I had students who had plans, that they made plans for this week. I had a group of young women in class who decided that, their project for the week was they were going to go up to people they didn't know and try to make conversation and like ask for the time and ask for directions. They wanted to learn how to talk to people they didn't know. I had another student who planned to redecorate her room during the week. This is one of the things she was going to do with her extra time. And I think they ended up just really proud of themselves for learning how to. A lot of them said that before this week, they didn't actually know how to drive to school without using their phone. And by the end of the week, they could drive all to all kinds of different places without using their phones. And they were really proud of themselves. So I think even though it was hard for them to give up their phones, I think they discovered a lot of things about themselves. And that was really exciting to see.
I love this. I love how you talk about teaching them critical thinking. You're pushing them into critical thinking. And listening to you, Donna, the way that you are processing this, to listen to your critical thinking as you model this. Of course, some of the fallout from this might be with all that publicity. Incoming freshman applications might be down to half of what they were before at Adelphi. That's a good possibility. That'll all be on you, right? Since you did this. But really, this is brilliant. The map thing, I often say to Lisa when we're in the car, remember when we had an atlas, and when I was out in Vancouver last week, I was in a restaurant that appeared to be being frequented by older people. Okay, so, and of course there I was. And I looked over, and there was a couple probably in their 80s. I don't know if they were traveling somewhere, but he had a paper road atlas sitting out on the table, and they were pointing and trying to figure out where they were and where they were going. And
see, this is generational, because I was the whole time thinking of MapQuest. I was thinking students would go to MapQuest and download directions that way off their laptop. So you had an atlas, I had MapQuest. Now they have Google Maps.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was following crumbs. Well, listen, we need to take a break here. We'll come back, and I want to hear a little bit more. We're going to talk with Don a little bit more about some of what the students learned, some of the takeaways from this. And then we're going to ask about, hey, how can we start to do this in our homes? How can we do this in our youth groups and elsewhere? We'll be right back. Tens of thousands of kids have been trained by their parents and youth workers to think Christianly about music and media with our How to Use Your Head to Guard Your Heart 3D guide to making wise media choices. This easy-to-use teaching tool needs to be in your youth ministry toolbox if you desire to teach your students to integrate their faith into all of life. Jesus calls us to follow him, and that includes following him into the 6 to 9 hours a day of screen time that shape and mold the beliefs and behaviors of our kids. To learn more about our 3D Media Evaluation Guide and to order a copy for every member of your youth group, go to our website at cpyu.org. Teach your kids to engage with media to the glory of God.
Welcome back to Youth Culture Matters. We are having a great conversation with Dr. Donna Freitas, who is talking about the impact of losing phones or handing phones over for a week. And we would love to hear some of the feedback that you got once phones were returned, and then some of the behaviors that were shared in the week that was following the returning of the phones. Because you did mention earlier that there were some changes. I would love to hear what some of those changes might have been.
Well, I think one of the things that was interesting about the experiment was just the community support at Adelphi for the students, and even just public safety, which is they were the people who took our phones, and they were so funny about it. They actually talked about how they had never had so much fun with students, because it was like they made a big deal out of it when we went to go give our phones over. When we went to go get them back, they had put them they had lined the students up, and they put them in evidence bags and like named them. And when we went back to go get the phones, Bob, who was like the head of public safety at Adelphi, he'd put a big sign on his door that said like "out sick today," because he was joking with the students about how, oops, I guess you don't get to have your phones back. And so all the students were laughing. And I think one of the things that happened when they got their phones back was Bob from public safety had made sure that they all turned off their phones before they put them in the safe, because he was like, I don't want to hear beeping all week, for people's messages and things. And so when they turned their phones back on, a bunch of their phones crashed because there were so many hundreds of notifications that their phones were like exploding. And I think there was, their eyes were getting big as there was just like their phones were just popping up with messages. And I think one of the things that was intense for them when they got their phones back was just how overwhelming it was. Like they were just looking at how many notifications they got in a week. And even with, all their friends knowing, like, if they sent a message, it's not going to arrive. So, like, it's like these were just like regular notifications on their phone and all their emails and things. And so I think that was sort of overwhelming. I think they were happy to have their phones back, too. But one of the things we talked about was, were there any habits that they were going to change in a more permanent way? And a lot of the students liked not using their phone to wake up in the morning. And that was a shift that they wanted to continue. We talked a lot about maybe turning their notifications off so that they didn't interrupt them all the time. We talked a lot about where you position yourself in relation to your phone when you're having conversations with friends and things. And so I think just in general, students were really became more conscious just of what life is like without them. And I actually had one young woman who talked about how she babysat her nieces. She had a bunch of nieces, and she would babysit them once a week. And they commented about how much more fun it was to spend the day with her when she didn't have her phone. And they even talked to her like sister about it and her mother. And so she came in thinking like, okay, maybe like when I spend the day with my nieces, I'm not going to bring my phone anymore. They like me better without it. And even just a lot of students talked about how they had different kinds of conversations, or even just had conversations they wouldn't have had otherwise without their phones. One of the biggest things they talked about, actually, which I think is so interesting, was how wonderful it was to be free of constant messages from their parents. And so they really, a lot of them, I think in many ways, some of the biggest resistance that we got to this experiment was not from anyone on campus. It was from people's parents. And I actually had a couple students who told me ahead of time, like, my parents don't want me to do this. And I was like, okay, well, you should have told them before, because now, like, you have to do this experiment. Like, you're gonna have to talk to them about it. And so I had students who were like arranging things with their parents, like you can, I'll check email at night, and like I'll email you once a day, from my laptop, kind of thing. And a lot of the students talked about how wonderful it was not to be tracked by their parents. I was actually amazed by how many college students' parents were tracking them. I thought, wow, like they're college students and their parents are tracking them. They loved the freedom of that. So that came up a lot. They felt pretty gleeful about it, actually. But I also thought, like, one of the things that was also interesting was just how many of their professors were shocked that they were doing this, when it came up in the course of their classes, and professors were surprised that they had given up their phones, that they had been willing to, but also for such a long time, for a whole week. And I had some professor colleagues who were like, what, are you crazy? Like, having your students give up their phones for a week? Like, are you allowed to do that? And so I think one of the things that was so interesting was what a stir it caused everyone that we did this. But I think one of my favorite things at the end of the semester was I had the students over the course of the semester had to write a series of letters to themselves, to each other, about like social media and smartphones and their usage. And the very last letter they had to write for the class, the final letter was to me, just about what they were taking away from the class. And so many of them said that they said that they would never grab their phone again without thinking of Professor Freitas. And I was like, well, good.
So Donna, now that it's over, you're into a new semester. Have you stayed connected with any of these students? And have they stuck with what their resolutions were? Have they pursued what they learned, trying to flourish a little more in real life relationships? Or has there been a slide back into old habits?
Oh, well, I mean, I haven't seen too many of them around campus, but I think we talked a lot about that after we did the experiment, because there was still about maybe 5 weeks left of class after, maybe it was like 4 weeks after we did the experiment. And, a lot of them, we also checked their usage again before the end of the class. And I think a lot of them backslid, which we talked about. And, but I do think that, the best that I could offer them is just the chance to be more conscious of their usage and just to be thinking about it. And I think that happened, even if they continue to sort of go up and down with their usage and, sort of have weeks when their usage tops 8 hours a day and all of that. I think there's no doubt in my mind or theirs that they are thinking about it. That, I think this is essentially for all of us, it's a lifelong struggle at this point. And I think one of the things that we really have to think about as teachers, mentors, as parents, and just, for ourselves is, what does a healthy relationship look like with our devices, and how do we achieve that? And I think we need to not be so afraid to ask our kids and our students to actually try really hard things, like giving up their phones for a day or for a week. I think really that's one of the only ways that we can change our habits and change our thinking around it. Some of it just has to do with seeing what it's like again to live without it for a while, and who we are, and like what is it like to be truly alone and not have our phone to turn to when we don't feel like thinking. And that was actually one of the things the students talked about the most, of just being alone with themselves and their thoughts, as something that was a feature of their week. And I think it's important for us not to be afraid to challenge people and challenge kids to do hard things around their phones, because I really think that's the only way we're going to become thinkers and we're going to change our habits.
That's good. I am curious if you mentioned the dynamic of having a healthy relationship with our devices. I am curious first if there were some lists of tools that you gave to students as they both prepared and then afterwards to have a healthier relationship with their devices that you might be able to share with our audience. But then I also think about what you had mentioned about with parents and the interaction with parents, and maybe even some words of advice for parents who may or may not have students in college, but even as they're preparing for that, how they might be able to have healthier relationship, maybe not just with their own devices, but with their kids' devices?
Well, I mean, it did seem like of anyone who resisted this project, the people who resisted the most were my students' parents. There were very few parents. There were a few, who were like, "Oh, it's good that you're going to be doing this. Like, it's going to be good for you." But a lot of them were just freaking out. And one of the things we talked about at one point in the class was how many times their parents contact them a day, and for some of them, it was like over 20. They were just getting constant messages from their parents, and there was also this issue of if my mother doesn't hear from me within 20 minutes, it doesn't matter if I'm in class, it doesn't matter if I'm at practice, she freaks out. Like I have to get back to her. My dad freaks out if I'm not, if the second I arrive at school, I don't text him to say I'm here. And I was actually I was surprised by how intensely parents were sort of watching their kids all the time. And I do think that the students talked a lot about how the biggest challenge for them one of the biggest challenges of giving up their phones was going to be the fact that their parents were going to be upset all the time. And so I think, I understand the concern or this wish that I want to know my kid's okay all the time. But I think we really need to balance that out with the fact that the sheer presence of the smartphone and access to social media and the constant interruption, that's breaking our attention and our focus, our ability to read or do homework or, get anything done is its own kind of problem and danger, I think, to us. And so I think parents really need to weigh that need to know all the time with the fact that it is really interrupting their children's ability to just be in school, to get an education, and to pursue healthy relationships and conversations and connections with people, even with them, with their parents. And so I think, even though it is hard to maybe let your kid go a day, without contacting them, it is also hard for all of us to be living with this constant addiction, essentially, of grabbing from our phones and not being able to get anything done in the meantime or have an unbroken conversation. So I do think it's one of the most important things we can do for kids today is help them develop the skill of attention, conversation, sustained relationship, freedom, ability to listen to their own thoughts. So, all of those things are being challenged by the presence of our devices and this constant need to be in touch.
You have given us so much to think about here, and I'm just going to say, when you talked about someone getting contacted 20 times a day, you can't see us, but Jason had his head buried in his hands. Chris was leaning back in disbelief, with laughter. And I was thinking, I must be an oddball. Well, I am, but I must be an oddball because when I went off to college, my parents dropped me off. I didn't talk to them for 8 weeks. There was there was a payphone conversation after 8 weeks, and even then I'm thinking, I could go longer, and I'm sure they could have as well. And these were people who loved me, and I loved them. So, yeah, it's just great. And I also thought, we need to get people to listen to that last podcast we released on the collapse of parenting by, with Leonard Sachs, the conversation we had with him. So this is so helpful. One takeaway that I'll mention right now is for the youth workers who are listening. I mean, Donna spoke clearly to parents, and I'm thinking here about youth workers as well. She spoke a lot of truth to you folks as well, but why not a retreat where you get people kids to experience the flourishing, the relational flourishing, the depth of relationships, the solitude that they were created for by just taking them away and letting them know ahead of time, phones don't go. Kids will love that. I'm convinced of that, and we hear that all the time as youth workers are doing that. So, Donna, this is great. I know we need to let you go. You have a class to teach. Any last parting words, anything you direct us to? And I want to know, are you going to write on this? Is there going to be a book that comes out of this?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I've thought about writing about it since it was such an intense experiment. I would say just for people who are working with youth groups and who are doing retreats, like one of the things that's very common at Catholic college campuses is for who that do a lot of retreats. They often make their students leave their devices home or say this is a device-free retreat. And I hear all the time from students how much they like that.
Yeah.
And I think often people are looking for permission to unplug. And, I also think, I've talked to a lot of youth ministers before, both old and younger. And I think there's such a frenzy to try to reach out to kids on Twitter and to be with them on Facebook and all of that. And I think if there's anything that I learned from the research that I did and just even from working with a lot of my students is they don't necessarily want us to meet them where they are. They want them to meet us where they're not. Like they're looking for us to help them be in a place where they're not normally. And one of those places right now is, they're looking to not be on their phones, I think, and for us to help them get there because they're having such a hard time doing it on their own. And so I would say just don't be afraid to challenge them in that way because I think they want to be challenged.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to remind everybody that, again, go to the podcast page for this particular episode. Scroll down. We will include links to everything that's been Donna has mentioned, all the things Donna has mentioned, and additional links as well to helpful things that will help you navigate this. And subscribe to the podcast. Leave a good comment. That will help us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So, Donna, thank you. We'll let you get to class. Jason.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, Jason.
Thanks so much for having me
Yeah,
today.
it's always fun to have you on here. And let us know next time you do something crazy, and we'll let you come on here and talk to us about it. We
That's
love
right.
that. I mean, it's so good. Jason, thank you. Chris, thank you. And for everyone who's listening, come back and join us next time on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.